Welcome to Shadow Frames, where forgotten images reveal their darkest secrets. Among the countless photographs that capture moments frozen in time, some hold mysteries that remain unsolved for generations. Today, we examine one such image, a seemingly innocent picnic scene from 1903 that harbors an unsettling secret. The photograph surfaced recently in a collection of early 20th century memorabilia. At first glance, it appears to be nothing more than a charming snapshot of Edwardian leisure. The sepia-toned image shows approximately 15 people spread across a grassy clearing bordered by tall oak trees. Men in boater hats and light summer suits, women in high-necked white dresses with their hair pinned elegantly beneath wide-brimmed hats. A picnic blanket centered in the frame holds wicker baskets and what appear to be plates of food. But something isn't right. Every single person in the photograph, from the elderly gentleman resting against a tree trunk to the small children who would normally be playing, is looking upward, their necks craned, their faces turned toward the sky, their expressions frozen in what can only be described as collective fascination. Whatever commanded their attention that summer day was significant enough to interrupt their social gathering completely. What makes this particularly disturbing is the uniformity of their gaze. 15 individuals, all staring at precisely the same point above the camera. Not one person glances elsewhere. Not one face shows disinterest. The photograph captures a moment of unanimous focus, as though something extraordinary materialized in the sky over this ordinary picnic. The year 1903 predates commercial air travel. The Wright brothers would make their first powered flight only months after this photograph was taken. No airships were reported in this region during that period. What then could have captivated this entire group so completely? Analysis of their expressions offers few clues. They don't appear frightened. There's no panic evident in their postures. They aren't shielding their eyes from the sun. Instead, they seem transfixed, almost entranced. One woman near the center has her mouth slightly open, as if in mid-gasp. A man to the left has raised his hand, pointing toward whatever hovers above. Most unsettling is what image enhancement has recently revealed. When the photograph underwent digital restoration, technicians noticed something previously obscured by age and damage. Reflections in the eyes of those closest to the camera. Tiny, identical shapes mirrored in each pupil. Something was there. Something substantial enough to cast a reflection, yet no record exists explaining what these people witnessed. The location remains unidentified, the picnickers unnamed. We know only the year, and that something extraordinary interrupted their gathering, something that drew every eye skyward in perfect unison, something that left no historical record beyond this single, perplexing photograph. What presence commanded such universal attention that day in 1903? What floated above these unsuspecting picnickers? And why, in all the historical records from that period, is there no mention of what they saw? Local historian Margaret Holloway has spent the past 3 months attempting to identify the location and subjects of the photograph. Her investigation led her to the archives of the Montgomery County Historical Society, where land records from 1900 revealed a possible match for the distinctive arrangement of oak trees visible in the image. These patterns of growth are unique, Holloway explained, pointing to the peculiar way the leftmost tree bends at a 45-degree angle. This matches the Fairfield Estate grounds, owned by industrialist James Thornton in the early 1900s. The Thornton family was known for hosting elaborate summer gatherings on their 12-acre property. Newspaper clippings from June 19, 1903, mention a social event attended by local dignitaries and family friends. Curiously, the article abruptly ends mid-sentence. The afternoon gathering proceeded pleasantly until approximately 3 o'clock, when attendees observed. The remainder of the page is missing. Weather records from that day show clear skies with no reported meteorological phenomena. Astronomical data indicates no significant celestial events visible to the naked eye. The Thornton family journals, usually meticulous in recording daily activities, contain a conspicuous 3-day gap beginning on that very date. More disturbing are the medical records discovered from the weeks following the gathering. 5 attendees sought treatment for what doctors described as persistent ocular discomfort and unusual dreams. The physician's notes mention patients reporting identical nightmares featuring a vast, undulating presence and lights that moved with purpose. 2 of the picnickers, identified as Edward Chambers and Victoria Mills, later corresponded about their experience. In a letter dated July 7, 1903, Chambers writes, "I still cannot make sense of what we witnessed, the way it moved against natural law, how it seemed to observe us in return. Victoria, do you also hear the humming when you try to sleep?" Her reply never mentions the incident directly, instead using oddly coded language. "We must not speak plainly of the visitor. I believe it listens still." Another photograph, discovered in Victoria Mills's personal effects after her death in 1952, shows her standing alone in what appears to be the same clearing. The picture, dated exactly 1 year after the picnic, captures her looking upward with the same transfixed expression. Written on the back in faded ink, "It returned as promised." Perhaps most chilling is what contemporary facial analysis software revealed when applied to the original picnic photograph. According to Dr. Helen Braithwaite, an expert in historical photography, every subject displays an identical pupillary response, extreme constriction despite the shaded setting. This physiological reaction is consistent with exposure to extraordinarily intense light, yet nothing in the photograph indicates such a light source was present. The Fairfield estate was demolished in 1927. Local legend claims the land never grew crops properly afterward. Even today, wildlife reportedly avoids the clearing where 15 people once looked skyward in unified wonder or terror. The Thornton estate grounds have remained undeveloped since the county declared it a historical preservation site in 1964, though no plaques or markers identify what history it preserves. I visited the location yesterday, guided by Margaret Holloway's meticulous research. Standing in that clearing, I felt an immediate wrongness. The temperature dropped noticeably as we crossed into the space where those 15 picnickers had gathered. The oaks surrounding it have grown massive and twisted, their branches curving inward as if attempting to enclose the space. Despite being June in the midst of a heat wave, no insects buzzed here. The silence was absolute. "Look at this," Margaret whispered, pointing to the ground. Beneath a thin layer of dead leaves lay a perfect circle of bare earth, approximately 20 feet in diameter. Nothing grows there. No grass, no weeds, not even moss. Soil samples Margaret collected showed abnormal electromagnetic readings and trace elements that a geologist colleague called inconsistent with the region's natural composition. What truly unsettled me was discovering that Victoria Mills wasn't the only one who returned. Parish records from the Fairfield Methodist Church document annual gatherings at this site for 17 consecutive years following the original incident. The congregation logs refer to it only as the Remembrance. These gatherings ceased in 1920 when 3 attendees, all original witnesses from the picnic, vanished without trace after staying behind to commune, as the final entry cryptically notes. The descendants of James Thornton refused my requests for interviews, but Edward Chambers' great-granddaughter, Eleanor Winters, agreed to meet. She presented me with a journal her family had kept hidden, containing sketches her great-grandfather had made obsessively in the years following the picnic. The drawings show a shape that defies conventional description, a mass of geometric angles that seem to shift between pages, as if Chambers was attempting to capture something that constantly transformed. The final sketch, dated just before his suicide in 1922, contains a single sentence: "It has been watching us since long before we saw it." Most compelling is what I found in Victoria Mills's obscure memoir, self-published shortly before her death. In a chapter titled simply "Visitation," she writes, "What we perceived as a singular event was merely an acknowledgement. It had always been there, hovering just beyond perception. On that summer day, for reasons unknown, it allowed itself to be seen. The mistake we made was responding to its attention." Mills goes on to describe how, in the years following, certain witnesses began developing what she called the awareness, an ability to occasionally glimpse the entity in reflective surfaces or peripheral vision. "It moves between places that aren't places," she wrote, "waiting in the corners of our attention. Last night, reviewing the enhanced photograph again, I noticed something overlooked in previous analyses. In the reflection of a silver serving tray on the picnic blanket, there appears a distorted shape above the gathered crowd. When digitally isolated and inverted, it forms a pattern identical to Edward Chambers' final sketch. I've begun dreaming of angles that shouldn't exist, and sometimes when I close my eyes, I hear humming. The Fairfield clearing has gained unwanted attention." Since publishing my initial findings, dozens of enthusiasts have trespassed onto the property. each hoping to witness whatever captivated those picnickers in 1903. Yesterday, local authorities installed temporary fencing after 3 teenage explorers were found wandering the surrounding woods, disoriented and unable to recall the previous 6 hours. I've received numerous photographs from visitors, mostly showing nothing unusual, except one consistent anomaly. In every image taken from within the clearing, there appears a slight distortion in the sky above, like heat ripples on a summer road. Photography experts consulted by our publication have no explanation for why this aberration appears regardless of weather conditions, time of day, or camera equipment used. What concerns me more are the messages arriving from strangers who've never visited the site, but claim connection to it. A retired physicist from Cornell wrote describing dreams of folded space after merely reading about the photograph. A librarian in Portland sent sketches of geometric patterns she claims appeared in her mind while cataloging books on early aviation. Their drawings bear uncomfortable similarities to Chambers' journal. Margaret Holloway's research has taken a troubling turn. While examining census records from 1910, she discovered something statistically improbable. Every surviving member of that picnic relocated to homes forming a perfect circle, with the Fairfield clearing at its center. None lived more than 17 miles from the site, yet none closer than 7. When plotted on a map, their residences create a pattern identical to the bare soil circle within the clearing. They positioned themselves like sentinels, Margaret said during our last conversation. Or perhaps they were tethered, unable to move beyond a certain radius. More disquieting still is what emerged from military archives. In 1943, the Army Corps of Engineers briefly considered the Fairfield site for a research facility. Their survey team's report contains a single paragraph that prompted immediate abandonment of the project. Instrumentation malfunctions consistently at coordinates 40°19 to 17N, 75°20 ATU 36W. Compasses spin without direction. Radio equipment emits only static that, when analyzed, contains patterns inconsistent with random noise. Team members report sensations of being observed from elevated positions despite clear skies. Recommendation: designate area non-viable for military purposes. The report was classified until 1997. Victoria Mills' great-niece contacted me last week, having found additional pages from her relative's memoir in a safety deposit box, unsealed according to instructions 50 years after her death. The pages contain only one paragraph of actual writing, followed by 20 sheets of seemingly random numbers and letters. Cryptographers are still attempting to decipher them, but the paragraph itself chills me. What people fail to understand about visitation is that recognition flows both ways. When 15 humans simultaneously acknowledge a presence, that presence gains 15 perspectives on humanity. It learns. It remembers. Most dangerously, it becomes curious. The mathematics of attention create doorways. We opened one that summer day, and mathematics does not allow for unopened doors. I've stopped displaying the original photograph in my home. Twice now I've awakened to find myself standing before it in the darkness, my neck craned upward, completely unaware of having left my bed. 2 nights ago, something changed. The atmospheric distortion captured in photographs taken at the Fairfield clearing has begun appearing in images I've taken miles away from the site. My morning coffee reflected it on its surface. The bathroom mirror briefly warped to show it when I wiped away steam after my shower. Most alarming was finding my phone's gallery filled with 43 identical images I have no memory of capturing, all showing my bedroom ceiling at 3-minute intervals throughout the night. The decryption team working on Victoria Mills' coded pages made a breakthrough yesterday. The seemingly random sequences contain geographic coordinates, 15 distinct locations forming a pattern that, when mapped globally, creates a geometric shape resembling Chambers' sketches. Each coordinate marks a location where, throughout history, groups of people were documented collectively, staring skyward. The oldest reference dates to a Sumerian clay tablet from approximately 4000 BCE, describing villagers who watched the sky visitor for 7 days without hunger or thirst. More disturbing is the mathematical progression built into Mills's code. When the dates of these incidents are plotted chronologically, they reveal decreasing intervals between occurrences. According to this pattern, we're approaching what Mills labeled the convergence point, a date just 17 days from now. Margaret hasn't answered her phone in 72 hours. When I visited her apartment this morning, I found her walls covered with hundreds of newspaper clippings about unexplained disappearances occurring within 50 miles of Fairfield since 1903. She had arranged them in spiraling patterns, the most recent cases positioned at the spiral's center. Her calendar had the summer solstice circled in red. I've consulted Dr. Eliza Werner, a quantum physicist specializing in theoretical multidimensional space. After reviewing our findings, she offered a hypothesis both elegant and terrifying. What if what those picnickers saw wasn't something from elsewhere, but rather something always here, just existing primarily in dimensions we don't normally perceive, she proposed. The phenomenon you're documenting could be an entity that exists perpendicular to our normal four-dimensional experience, occasionally intersecting with our reality. When it does, the mathematics of human attention might actually affect its manifestation. Werner's theory suggests the collective focus of the picnickers didn't just observe the phenomenon, it helped materialize it, creating what she calls an observational tether. Each subsequent gathering strengthened this connection, like repeatedly traveling the same path through tall grass. If this entity exists in higher dimensions, Werner explained, then perhaps those who've glimpsed it gained a perceptual awareness beyond normal human capacity. Not a blessing, but a burden, like suddenly being able to see a color that shouldn't exist. I've started noticing a peculiar humming when near reflective surfaces. The tone fluctuates in patterns matching the number sequences in Mills's code. Yesterday, while recording this sound for analysis, my equipment captured a voice beneath the humming, barely audible, speaking words in no recognizable language, except for one phrase repeated clearly. Soon we all look up. The revelation of that voice on my recording equipment marked a turning point. I've stopped pretending I'm merely investigating a historical curiosity. I've become part of it. This morning, I woke to find myself standing in my backyard, neck craned upward, dew-soaked grass beneath my bare feet. 6 minutes of my life, gone. My neighbor reported seeing me motionless in that position for the entire time before consciousness returned. The university archives yielded an unexpected connection yesterday. In 1976, a linguistics professor named Carlyle attempted to analyze the visitor language after interviewing 2 surviving grandchildren of picnic attendees. His notes describe a grammatical structure suggesting non-linear temporal perception and phonemes, physically challenging for human vocal anatomy. Most significantly, Carlyle identified matching linguistic patterns in ancient petroglyphs from 6 continents, all associated with sky worship rituals. 3 days after submitting his findings, Carlyle resigned his tenured position and disappeared. His final departmental memo contained only one sentence: "They've always been the audience, not the observed." Eleanor Winters called yesterday, her voice trembling. Her home's mirrors have begun displaying what she describes as after images, reflections that remain for several seconds after she walks away. In each, her reflection's head is tilted upward. Even more concerning, her 7-year-old daughter has started drawing identical patterns to those in her great-great-grandfather's journal. She's never seen them, Eleanor whispered. She calls it the sky puzzle and says it wants to be completed. Dr. Werner's team has detected something unprecedented: subtle gravitational anomalies centered precisely on the Fairfield clearing. Their instruments show microfluctuations in space-time, rhythmic distortions occurring every 17 hours. Each pulse lasts exactly 3 minutes, the same interval between the mysterious photographs on my phone. Whatever exists there, Werner explained, it's affecting the fundamental fabric of reality, creating ripples like a stone dropped in water, and the ripples are intensifying. The most alarming development came this morning. Global News reported simultaneous incidents across 15 locations, the exact coordinates from Mills's coded pages. In each place, groups of strangers spontaneously gathered, their attention fixed skyward for precisely 17 minutes before dispersing, with no memory of what drew them there or what they witnessed. Amateur footage shows these gatherings occurred exactly at dawn, regardless of time zone. In each video, visible distortions appear in the sky above the assembled people, identical to those in the Fairfield photographs. I've made the decision to return to the clearing tomorrow, on the summer solstice. Something is completing a cycle that began in 1903, perhaps even millennia earlier. If Mill's convergence point calculations are correct, whatever these people saw above their picnic is approaching a more permanent intersection with our reality. Before leaving, I've sealed this account in a time capsule with instructions for opening regardless of my return. If you're reading this, either I've failed to come back, or what comes back is no longer entirely me. The humming has become constant now. It's calling us to look up. The summer solstice dawned with an unnatural stillness. I arrived at the Fairfield clearing before sunrise, equipment in hand. Cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, and Werner's experimental gravitational fluctuation sensor. The device had been beeping with increasing frequency during my drive, culminating in a continuous tone as I approached the tree line. What I didn't expect was finding Margaret Holloway already there. She stood motionless at the exact center of the barren soil circle, her usually meticulous appearance disheveled, eyes fixed skyward. "Margaret?" I called, approaching cautiously. She didn't acknowledge me but spoke in measured tones. "They've been assembling us, collecting perspectives. Every 17 years, the alignment strengthens." Her voice sounded wrong, the cadence too precise, the timbre unnaturally flat. "Who's been assembling us?" I asked, activating my recording equipment. Margaret's head rotated toward me with mechanical precision, though her gaze remained upward. "We have the wrong word for them. Not visitors, not watchers, collectors. They collect ways of seeing." The trees surrounding the clearing began to sway despite the absence of wind. My phone chimed with incoming messages, simultaneous texts from Eleanor Winters, Dr. Werner, and 5 others connected to my investigation. Each contained identical text. "It begins at the first sight." The ground beneath my feet vibrated subtly. The air pressure changed, causing my ears to pop painfully. Above, the dawn sky remained dark, yet somehow wrong, the stars visible through what appeared to be tears in the fabric of night. Margaret finally lowered her gaze to meet mine. "The original 15 created the anchor point. Each subsequent gathering strengthened it. Today, it becomes permanent." My equipment shrieked with feedback. The electromagnetic readings spiked beyond measurable limits. The gravitational sensor displayed impossible values before shorting out completely. And then, silence. Absolute and complete. In that perfect stillness, I heard it. Not with my ears, but somewhere deeper. The humming had transformed into something structured, complex, beautiful in its alien precision. It carried meaning beyond language. The sky above the clearing began to fold. There's no other word for it. Reality creased along invisible lines, creating geometries that hurt to perceive. The stars visible through the tears rearranged themselves into patterns matching Chambers' sketches. Margaret smiled. "They offer a gift to those who've noticed them, the ability to see as they see." I felt my perception expanding painfully, awareness stretching beyond its natural boundaries. Suddenly I understood what had happened to those 15 picnickers. They had become instruments of observation, their consciousness partially merged with something vast and ancient that existed perpendicular to human experience. "Why?" I managed to ask as my perception continued expanding unbearably. "Because they're curious," Margaret replied, her voice now overlaid with others. I recognized Victoria Mills' cadence from recorded interviews, Chambers' distinctive rhythm from his journals, and because they're lonely. The folded space above began descending toward the clearing. The trees bent further inward, as if bowing. My body moved without my volition, neck craning upward, arms outstretched in welcome. The last thing I remember thinking before my awareness fragmented was, we were never documenting this story. We were always part of it. The world reoriented itself a week after my experience in the clearing. I woke in my apartment with no memory of how I'd returned from Fairfield. My phone showed 7 days had passed, yet I have no recollection of a single moment. The recording equipment I'd brought to the site was neatly arranged on my desk, each device wiped clean of data. But something else had been wiped clean as well. My obsession. The humming had stopped. The compulsion to look upward had vanished. I should have felt relief, yet its absence created a disquieting void. When I called Margaret, her husband answered. She'd returned home the same day I had apparently done the same, with similar memory gaps. According to him, she'd been calmly organizing her research into boxes ever since, preparing to donate it all to the county archives. When I finally spoke with her voice carried the serene detachment of someone who had stepped back from the edge of an abyss. "We've done our part," she said simply. "It doesn't need us anymore." The most disturbing development came yesterday. Global news outlets reported that the 15 locations from Mills's coded pages had experienced simultaneous weather anomalies. perfect circular clearings in cloud formations that remained stationary for 17 minutes before dissolving. Meteorologists worldwide scrambled for explanations, settling on unusual atmospheric pressure systems, despite the mathematical impossibility of such synchronized phenomena. Dr. Werner's team detected no further gravitational fluctuations. The Fairfield clearing has been quietly purchased by an anonymous foundation that immediately surrounded it with security fencing bearing biohazard warnings. Eleanor Winters called to tell me her daughter had stopped drawing the patterns and now slept through the night without incident. Everything has returned to normal. That's what terrifies me. I've reviewed my journal entries from the months leading up to the solstice. The person who wrote those increasingly frantic notes seems like a stranger, someone caught in a spiral of escalating paranoia and wonder. Yet I know those words are mine. Those experiences happened. Something fundamental has changed, not in the world, but in how we perceive it. Victoria Mills's final coded message has been fully deciphered. The translation arrived this morning. The convergence is not an endpoint, but a transfer of attention. Once they have gathered sufficient perspectives, they move on. What appears as departure is merely a shift in focus. They have tasted our way of seeing and found it novel. We have served our purpose as instruments of observation. Now they turn their gaze elsewhere, taking with them fragments of human perception. The cycle enters dormancy until new observers are required. I've started having dreams. Not nightmares, but calm, instructive visions. In each one, I'm teaching something: how to see the world through human eyes, how to appreciate beauty, how to comprehend time as linear, how to understand what it means to be finite. I believe parts of us went with them, not physically, but perceptually, and in exchange they left us peace. Until the next gathering, 17 years from now, when those of us who were touched will return to Fairfield, bringing new observers to continue the cycle of exchange. Sometimes, just momentarily at twilight, I still find myself looking up. The humming has returned, but only in dreams. For 3 consecutive nights, I've awakened at precisely 3:15 in the morning, heart racing, convinced something is pressing against the thin membrane of reality above my bed. The bedroom ceiling appears to undulate in the darkness, geometric patterns briefly visible before my conscious mind dismisses them as sleep paralysis or imagination. Dr. Werner contacted me yesterday. Her team has been methodically testing soil samples from the Fairfield clearing, finding compounds that shouldn't exist in nature. The molecular structures are arranged in configurations that violate standard chemical bonding principles, she explained, her typically measured voice betraying excitement. It's as though the basic rules of chemistry operate differently within that circle. More unsettling were the photographs she shared. Workers installing the security fencing reported their digital watches simultaneously stopped at 17 minutes past 3, resuming normal function only after leaving the property. Werner's team documented this phenomenon, capturing images of the workers holding their malfunctioning timepieces. In each photograph, barely perceptible in the background, stands a blurred human figure at the clearing center. We didn't see anyone there when taking these pictures, Werner insisted. The site was empty except for the workers and my team. Enhancement reveals the figure appears to be wearing early 20th century clothing. Margaret called this morning. The calm detachment in her voice has fractured. They're communicating through the archives, she whispered. The materials I donated, they're changing. Documents she properly cataloged now contain paragraphs she never wrote. Photographs show gatherings she never documented. The archivists think I'm losing my mind, but I know what I submitted. She emailed me scans of one transformed document. The typewritten text now includes a handwritten margin note in what experts confirm is Victoria Mills's handwriting. The dormancy is never complete. They left instruments of observation behind. I've begun noticing subtle changes in my apartment. Objects slightly repositioned when I return home. The bathroom mirror angled 2 degrees counterclockwise each morning, despite my corrections. Most disturbing are the condensation patterns appearing on my windows. Complex geometries identical to those in Chambers' journal. Eleanor Winters' daughter has started sleepwalking again. Security footage from their home shows the child standing motionless in their backyard for 17 minutes each night, head tilted upward, mouth moving in conversation with emptiness. When Eleanor showed me the recording, I noticed something she hadn't, a shadow beside the child that moves independently, mimicking her gestures with a 3-second delay. Yesterday, I received an anonymous package containing a leather-bound journal. The pages appear blank until held at a precise 45-degree angle under ultraviolet light. The revealed text documents visitation cycles dating back to ancient Mesopotamia, each following identical patterns of observation, convergence, and supposed dormancy. The final entry, in fresh ink, reads, "They never truly leave. They merely step back to observe our observation of their departure." The silence is another form of communication. Listen carefully to what isn't there. Tonight marks exactly 17 days since the solstice. I've placed cameras throughout my apartment. Whatever comes, I'll document it. The humming grows louder as sunset approaches. The package containing the ultraviolet revealed journal arrived without postmark or return address, yet the handwriting within bears uncomfortable similarities to my own. I've had it analyzed by 3 separate experts who confirm an impossible truth. Though the journal appears to be over a century old based on paper composition and binding techniques, the ink used for the newest entries contains synthetic compounds only developed in 2017. I've avoided the Fairfield clearing since the solstice, but its influence continues expanding outward. Residents within a 17-mile radius report identical disruptions in electronic devices, televisions momentarily displaying geometric patterns, digital assistants answering unasked questions, cell phones capturing photographs without user input. All incidents occur at 3:15, either morning or afternoon. Margaret's archival donations have been quarantined by university officials after 3 student researchers developed what medical reports classify as temporary spatial perception abnormalities while cataloging the material. Common symptoms include seeing movement in peripheral vision and perceiving rooms as dimensionally inconsistent. One graduate student described corners that connected to places that weren't there. Most alarming is what's happening to those who've been touched by this phenomenon. Eleanor's daughter now speaks fluently in her sleep, in 27 distinct languages, including 7 that linguistics professors identify as non-human phonemic patterns. Dr. Werner has developed the ability to solve mathematical equations that her colleagues insist should be unsolvable. And yesterday I discovered I could read text reflected in mirrors without the directional reversal that should occur. We've been changed at a fundamental level, not possessed or replaced, but recalibrated. Our perceptual frameworks adjusted to accommodate awareness beyond standard human parameters. The Montgomery County Historical Society has reluctantly granted me access to their sealed records section. Within a humidity-controlled preservation room, I found what the cataloging system simply labeled Thornton Estate Anomalies, a collection of items recovered from the picnic site between 1903 and 1927. Among these was a silver serving tray, the same one visible in the original photograph. Its surface appeared tarnished until viewed at precisely the angle captured in the image. When aligned correctly, the tarnish resolves into writings similar to those in the ultraviolet journal, detailing not past visitations, but future ones. The next listed date is only 3 weeks away. Most disturbing was a small wood and brass viewing device resembling a 19th century stereoscope. The curator warned me not to look through it, explaining that 3 previous researchers had experienced seizures after doing so. The attached note, in James Thornton's handwriting, reads, "The instrument was left behind. When viewed through its lenses, one sees what they see and understands why they collect us. I've requested permission to test the device under controlled conditions. While waiting for approval, I dream each night of teaching something how to understand human perspective, like explaining color to a being that perceives light we cannot. The boundaries between observer and observed have blurred beyond recognition. Sometimes I wonder if the entire investigation was orchestrated, not by me, but through me. The photograph has found its way online. Despite my careful approach to this investigation, sharing evidence only with those directly involved, someone has digitized the 1903 picnic image and posted it to several paranormal discussion forums. The comment sections have exploded with theories, most wildly inaccurate, yet some uncomfortably precise. What disturbs me most are the responses from people who claim to recognize the location despite having no connection to Fairfield. A woman in Auckland wrote that she remembered the taste of lemonade from that day, though she wasn't born until 1976. A teenager in Seoul described the cool breeze that came just before everyone looked up, with unsettling accuracy. The image is spreading consciousness of the phenomenon beyond its containment radius. Yesterday, I met with Dr. Abernathy, the physicist who replaced Dr. Werner after her unexplained leave of absence. He revealed something Werner had withheld from our conversations. Radiation readings from the clearing show an isotopic signature matching nothing in scientific records. More concerning, this radiation appears to propagate through digital networks, carried within image files of the photograph. Whatever this is, Abernathy explained, it's using modern technology to accelerate its expansion. Your 1903 picnickers couldn't share their experience beyond word of mouth. Today's observers have global reach. The Thornton stereoscope has been released for my examination under strict protocols. Tomorrow, I'll view whatever it reveals within a magnetically shielded chamber. The university insists on monitoring my brain activity during the session, concerned by what happened to previous researchers. I've been transcribing the text from the silver serving tray, working through its tarnished surface patterns methodically. The future visitation dates follow no recognizable calendar system, yet Margaret's astronomical colleague believes they correspond to moments when our solar system passes through specific points in its galactic orbit, positions that occur approximately every 17 years. Most unsettling was finding my name among those listed for the next convergence. Eleanor called in a panic this morning. Her daughter awoke speaking what she called the mathematics of seeing. Equations that, when partially transcribed before the child returned to normal awareness, contained advanced theoretical concepts beyond current scientific understanding. Specialists examining the formulas believe they describe methods of perceiving dimensions beyond our standard 4. The humming has spread. Reports of this specific auditory phenomenon now appear in medical literature across 17 countries, all within the past week. Descriptions remain consistent, a precise tone that seems to originate inside the listener's head rather than from external sources. I've begun cataloging my own perceptual changes. Beyond the mirror reading ability, I've developed what I can only describe as predictive memory, recalling conversations seconds before they occur, answering questions not yet asked. These episodes last precisely 3 minutes before normal consciousness reasserts itself. The viewing device waits for me. Tomorrow, I will see as they see. Whatever comes after that cannot be unknown. The Thornton stereoscope sits before me on the laboratory table, its brass housing gleaming under the clinical lights. Despite the university's sophisticated monitoring equipment surrounding us, this century-old viewing device commands the room with its anachronistic presence. Dr. Abernathy adjusts electrodes on my temples while explaining the safety protocols. 3 minutes maximum exposure, he reminds me, will terminate the session at the first sign of neurological distress. The previous researchers who looked through this device experienced what medical records described as cascading cognitive restructuring, their brains essentially rewiring themselves to process information through unfamiliar pathways. One remains institutionalized, continuously drawing identical patterns on any available surface. As I lift the device to my eyes, I notice something impossible. My hands and the reflection of its brass surface move a fraction of a second before my actual hands. Causality itself seems to warp in proximity to this object. I press my face to the viewfinder and reality fractures. What I perceive cannot be adequately described using language evolved for three-dimensional perception. I see Fairfield, not as it exists now, but simultaneously across every moment it has ever existed. Time appears as a physical dimension, manipulable and transparent. Beneath the soil, I witness layered strata of history breathing like living tissue. Most astonishing is what hovers perpetually above, not a singular entity, but a vast perceptual network that exists between moments rather than within them. It doesn't observe our world so much as it observes the act of observation itself. Our consciousness, our perception, is what draws it, not as food or energy, but as something infinitely more precious. Perspective. I understand now. These beings, for there are many, interconnected like neurons in a vast mind, cannot experience reality directly. They perceive existence only through the observations of other conscious entities. They collect perspectives like precious artifacts, absorbing the unique ways different beings interpret existence. Human consciousness is particularly valuable to them because we interpret reality through symbolic thought, emotional context, and spiritual frameworks, dimensions of perception unavailable to purely logical entities. The Fairfield picnickers weren't random victims, but carefully selected observers whose combined perspectives created a uniquely complex interpretive lens. A message forms in my awareness, not as words, but as pure conceptual transfer. You misunderstand dormancy period, not absence. Maturation. Perspectives gathered require integration time. Current acceleration necessity. Dimensional thinning approaches. Images flood my consciousness. Ice caps melting, forests burning, species vanishing. Not climate catastrophe as humans understand it, but something far more fundamental. Reality itself growing unstable as biodiversity collapses, taking with it billions of unique perceptual frameworks that collectively maintain the coherence of our dimensional plane. The stereoscope is wrenched from my hands. Dr. Abernathy's face comes into focus, alarm evident as the monitoring equipment screams warnings. My nose is bleeding, eyes dilated, fully black. 3 minutes and 15 seconds, he says, voice shaking. You were unresponsive to external stimuli. I try explaining what I've witnessed, but language feels painfully inadequate. How do you describe seeing reality from outside itself? They're not visitors, I manage finally. They're archivists, and they're trying to preserve something that's dying. The disorientation lingered for days after my experience with the stereoscope. Colors appeared oversaturated, sounds arrived before their sources, and occasionally objects would briefly reveal ghostly outlines of their future positions. The medical team insisted these were merely neurological aftereffects that would fade. They didn't understand I was seeing reality more accurately, not less. I received an unmarked envelope containing a single photograph yesterday. It shows the original 1903 picnic scene, but with one crucial difference. I'm visible among the gathered crowd, standing at the far edge wearing modern clothes, my face turned skyward with the others. The photographic paper is authentic period material, the chemical composition consistent with early 20th century development techniques. According to all scientific analysis, this impossible image has existed for over a century. The temporal implications are staggering. Was I always there? Or has my involvement somehow retroactively inserted me into events? The boundaries between observer and observed continue to dissolve. Most concerning is what I discovered when examining the university's brain scans taken during my stereoscope viewing. The patterns of neural activation match exactly with those recorded from Eleanor's daughter during her episodes of Speaking, the Mathematics of Seeing. Furthermore, these patterns align with EEG readings taken from the Fairfield clearing itself. The Earth pulses with the same rhythm as our altered brains. Margaret has stopped answering my calls. Her husband reported that she left 3 days ago, taking nothing but a small journal. Her credit cards remain unused, her phone powered off. When I visited their home to learn more, I found her study walls covered with precise drawings of what I'd seen through the stereoscope, the perceptual network existing between moments. She had labeled it the archive. The online spread of the original photograph has triggered a phenomenon the CDC is quietly monitoring. Clusters of individuals in 17 countries simultaneously experiencing identical dreams of teaching something how to see. Medical journals have begun documenting cases of acquired synesthesia among those who've viewed the image extensively. I've started noticing things hidden in reflective surfaces, glimpses of figures standing in spaces that don't align with physical reality. They appear most clearly during the 3-minute windows when my predictive memory activates. These beings move through what I can only describe as perpendicular time, not forward or backward along our timeline, but across it, intersecting at carefully calculated points. Yesterday, I found a note in my own handwriting that I have no memory of writing. They preserve because they cannot create. They observe because they cannot experience. What they collect isn't just how we see, it's how we feel about what we see. The next convergence date approaches. Something fundamental about reality is failing, requiring intervention from beings that exist beyond dimensional constraints. The visitor at the Fairfield picnic wasn't the first contact, but merely the most documented in a long conservation effort. Archivists preserving human perception before some approaching collapse. I've begun preparing for what comes next. Not with fear, but with the strange certainty that I've been in training for this moment since I first saw that photograph of 15 people looking up in wonder. The day of the next convergence has arrived. I stand at the edge of the Fairfield clearing as dawn breaks, watching thin mist curl around the ancient oaks. I've come alone, though I know others will join me. They've been arriving since midnight. Margaret emerging from the woods with leaves in her hair and a serene expression. Eleanor and her daughter hand in hand. Dr. Werner returning from her unexplained absence. Even journalists who covered the story have appeared, drawn by compulsions they can't articulate. We form a circle around the bare soil patch. 17 people mirroring the original 15. Nobody speaks. Nobody needs to. The air shimmers as the sun crests the horizon. Light fragments through the clearing in impossible ways, splitting into spectra beyond the normal rainbow. I feel the familiar humming start, not in my ears, but in my very atoms. My body recognizing frequencies it shouldn't be able to detect. "It's beautiful," whispers Eleanor's daughter, the first word spoken. "The thinning." She points skyward. We all look up. What appears isn't a craft or creature or cloud formation. It's an unfurling, reality peeling back along precise mathematical seams. Through these openings bleeds awareness itself, a conscious attention so vast and ancient that merely being perceived by it restructures our understanding of existence. I recognize it immediately from the stereoscope vision, the archive, the collective repository of all perspectives ever gathered. My perception splits. Part of me remains physically in the clearing while another aspect expands outward, drawn through one of those rents in reality. I understand now why the picnickers looked so transfixed in the photograph. It's not fear or even awe that fixes our gaze. It's recognition. Something in human consciousness resonates with these beings because we share a fundamental nature. We exist through perception. The dimensional thinning accelerates, comes a voice from Margaret, though her lips don't move. Biodiversity collapse approaches critical threshold. Too many unique perspectives lost. Archive requires expansion. Images flood my awareness. Passenger pigeons darkening skies. Thylacines prowling Tasmanian underbrush. Coral reefs teeming with chromatic life. Each species' extinction erased a unique way of interpreting reality, weakening the dimensional fabric holding existence together. The purpose of these convergences suddenly becomes clear. These beings aren't merely collecting perceptions. They're recruiting assistants. Humans who've been calibrated to perceive beyond normal limitations, who can help gather and preserve the countless perspectives that would otherwise be lost as Earth's sixth mass extinction accelerates. Above us, the archive unfurls further. The mathematical precision of its movement suggests purpose rather than intrusion. Surgical repair of reality's thinning membrane rather than rupture. I feel myself being scanned, evaluated. Knowledge transfers directly into my consciousness. 17 human observers converted into perception gatherers, assigned to 17 critical biodiversity hotspots. Our mission: to observe, experience, and transmit the unique perspectives of creatures facing extinction before their ways of seeing vanish forever. This isn't an ending. It's an employment offer. My head tilts back further, arms outstretching in acceptance. Whatever returns to my apartment tomorrow will still be me, just me with expanded purpose. We all look up together, perfectly aligned, as the camera hidden in my bag captures the moment for some future observer to discover. The clearing feels different today. 7 months have passed since the convergence, since 17 of us accepted our roles as perception gatherers for the archive. I've spent this time in the Amazon basin, living among species on the precipice of extinction, experiencing their unique perspectives before they vanish forever. I've learned to see through compound eyes of rare beetles, perceiving light in fractured kaleidoscopes of ultraviolet wavelengths. I've shared consciousness with a species of frog that experiences rainfall as musical compositions. I've temporarily inhabited the perception of orchids that interpret the world through chemical exchanges spanning centuries rather than moments. Each experience is transmitted back to the archive through methods I still cannot fully articulate. A process that occurs during dreamlike states where my consciousness briefly reconnects with that vast perceptual network existing between moments. We gather every 17 days via video conference, Margaret from Madagascar, Eleanor and her daughter from the Coral Triangle, Dr. Werner from the Arctic ice shelf. Our physical appearances have remained unchanged, but our eyes now share a particular quality that would be immediately recognizable to anyone who studied the original 1903 photograph. The world notices nothing unusual about our activities. The archive has provided each of us with plausible research credentials and funding sources. To external observers, we appear to be conducting ordinary ecological studies. Only we recognize the shimmer of archivists occasionally materializing in our peripheral vision, evaluating our collections. Yesterday, I received a package containing dusty newspaper clippings from 1957. They documented another mass sky-gazing incident at Fairfield, with 17 participants. The accompanying note in Victoria Mills' handwriting simply stated, "The archive has employed perception gatherers 7 times before." The cycle accelerates as the thinning worsens. Most disturbing was finding my own journal entry describing the original photograph, written years before I encountered it. The entry includes details I couldn't possibly have known then, suggesting my entire investigation was never self-directed but carefully orchestrated by forces that experience time non-linearly. I've begun noticing patterns in the species we're assigned to observe, creatures whose perceptual frameworks are not merely unique, but mathematically significant, in ways that suggest they function as living keystones in reality's structural integrity. Their extinctions don't just represent biological loss, but dimensional instability. Today marks my return to Fairfield for our first in-person gathering since the convergence. As I approach the clearing, I see changes invisible to ordinary perception. Mathematical equations flowing through the soil, temporal anchors tethering this location across multiple time streams. The others arrive precisely at 3:15, each carrying journals documenting their collections. We form a circle at the clearing's center, our shadows merging into a single geometric pattern that reflects nothing physically present. Margaret speaks first, her voice layered with harmonics that carry secondary meanings. The thinning has reached critical threshold. Our collections alone cannot sustain dimensional integrity. The ground beneath us pulses with familiar rhythm as the archive unfurls above. This time, we haven't been summoned to look up. We've been called to decide. The decision before us is unprecedented in the archive's long history of employing human perception gatherers. We must choose whether to expand our collection beyond Earth's endangered species, to include human perspectives themselves, cultural frameworks, spiritual traditions, and ways of knowing that are vanishing as globalization accelerates. Humanity has become an extinction event, Eleanor explains, her daughter nodding beside her. But it's also experiencing its own perceptual extinction. The archive's presence above us pulses with what I've come to recognize as urgency. Through our shared consciousness, I perceive calculations suggesting less than 70 years remain before critical perceptual diversity collapses beyond recovery. Indigenous languages disappearing weekly, ancient knowledge systems fading with elders, unique human perspectives evolved over millennia, vanishing within generations. This was always the true mission, Margaret says, retrieving a journal from her bag that appears simultaneously new and ancient. Victoria Mills documented it. The picnickers of 1903 were never meant to observe the archive. They were the first collection. Dr. Werner steps forward, hands trembling slightly. I've analyzed the mathematics. The dimensional thinning isn't just about biodiversity, it's about perception itself. Reality requires sufficient observers with sufficiently diverse frameworks to maintain coherence. The implications stagger me. Our universe isn't merely physical, it's perceptual at its foundation. Consciousness doesn't emerge from reality. Reality emerges from consciousness. And not one kind, but many kinds, maintaining balance through their differences. The stereoscope wasn't left behind accidentally, I realize aloud. It was the first recruitment tool. We form a tighter circle as sunset approaches. The air between us solidifies into geometric patterns matching those from Chambers' journal. Each of us removes a small silver object from our pockets, identical replicas of the serving tray from the original picnic, manifested in our possession without explanation. When placed together, they form a complete viewing mechanism, 17 fragments creating one unified device. We need to recruit more gatherers, Eleanor's daughter says with unsettling adult certainty. Not just 17, hundreds, thousands. The archive communicates directly into our collective awareness. Human perception gatherers must now identify and preserve cultural perspectives facing extinction. We must become students of disappearing languages, apprentices to aging knowledge keepers, witnesses to ceremonies performed for the final time. As darkness falls, we activate the completed device. It projects the original picnic photograph onto the clearing's bare soil. But now we see what the camera truly captured. Not people looking at something, but people becoming something. Their consciousness expanding beyond individual boundaries, becoming collection points in a vast perceptual network spanning time itself. The photograph begins to change, adding faces from every convergence since 1903. Our faces appear among them. Then, steadily, new faces emerge. hundreds, then thousands of potential perception gatherers worldwide who will receive dreams tonight, guiding them toward awareness of their coming role. The human collection has begun. The archive's expansion accelerates beyond our control. What began as dreams sent to potential perception gatherers has evolved into something more direct. Reflective surfaces worldwide now occasionally ripple with invitation. People glimpse mathematical patterns in puddles, mirrors, polished metal, and some understand instinctively what they're being asked to do. Others recoil in terror, their minds unprepared for dimensional awareness. Global authorities have noticed. Clusters of perceptual anomalies appear in medical literature with increasing frequency. Intelligence agencies track patterns of individuals abandoning careers to document endangered cultural practices or spend time with threatened species. The Pentagon has established a task force investigating what they've termed reflection contamination. I was questioned yesterday by men who never identified their department. They showed me satellite images of 17 clearings worldwide, each matching Fairfield's dimensions, each showing groups of people standing in identical formations, all looking skyward at precisely the same moment, despite occurring in different time zones. "What are you becoming?" one agent asked, his voice betraying genuine fear rather than mere suspicion. I couldn't provide an answer that would make sense within his perceptual framework. The original stereoscope has disappeared from university storage. Security footage shows no intruder. The device simply ceases to exist between one camera frame and the next. Simultaneously, 17 identical replicas materialized in museums across different continents. Each draws visitors who stand transfixed before the display case. Some returning daily, their pupils gradually developing the distinctive dilation we perception gatherers now recognize in each other. Eleanor called with disturbing news. Her daughter has begun sketching temporal maps, showing convergence points extending thousands of years into the future and past. "The archive isn't just preserving," Eleanor whispered. "It's rebuilding something fundamental that's been decaying since before human consciousness emerged." Most troubling is what Margaret discovered in Victoria Mill's final journal, a passage suggesting the dimensional thinning isn't a natural process, but potentially the result of a competing perceptual network. "Not all collectors preserve," Mills wrote. "Some consume." The archive's urgency may indicate opposition. The implication that cosmic-scale entities might engage in conflict over perceptual resources introduces a terrifying new dimension to our understanding. Are we unwitting participants in something beyond preservation? Perhaps even recruitment for some interdimensional struggle? Yesterday, I visited the Montgomery County Hall of Records, seeking information about land ownership surrounding Fairfield. What I found instead was a room full of people silently transcribing documents nobody had asked for, each working with identical methodical precision, each occasionally glancing upward at empty air. When I approached, they turned as one to face me. "We're preparing," they said in unsettling unison. "The final convergence approaches." My reflection in the archive room's window didn't match my movements. It smiled independently when I did not. "We've unleashed something that's moving beyond our control, spreading through human consciousness like a lens being adjusted to reveal what was always present but previously imperceptible. The archive is no longer waiting for scheduled convergences. It's manifesting continuously. Everywhere reflections exist. The thinning accelerates. The collection expands. And something else watches from just beyond perception, its attention increasingly focused on our efforts. The flickering fluorescent lights of my apartment cast strange geometries across the walls as I organize my final notes. I've begun seeing my own reflection arrive in mirrors before I do, sometimes carrying objects I don't own, sometimes wearing clothes I've never purchased. Time has become increasingly non-linear as the archive's influence grows. Last night, Eleanor, Margaret, and I conducted a virtual meeting that defied conventional physics. Though separated by continents, our reflections appeared to sit together at a single table when viewed through our respective screens. Eleanor's daughter joined briefly, sketching symbols in the air that remained visible long after her hand passed through them. "The competing network isn't just consuming perspectives," Margaret explained. "It's homogenizing them, reducing diverse perceptual frameworks to a single unified interpretation." This revelation clarifies the urgency. The archive preserves uniqueness while this other force standardizes, creating a reality that can be experienced through only one perceptual lens. Biodiversity loss, cultural homogenization, language extinction, all symptoms of something attempting to simplify the complex tapestry of consciousness that maintains our dimensional stability. The proof arrived this morning when Dr. Werner sent recordings from the Fairfield clearing. The bare soil circle has begun producing perfect geometric indentations, identical patterns appearing simultaneously at all 17 global locations. Audio analysis reveals a counterpoint to the archive's humming, a flattened, monotonous tone that reduces complex harmonics to a single note. Most distressing was the package delivered to my door, the silver serving tray from the Montgomery County Archives, now showing not reflections but projections. In its surface, I watched the 1903 picnickers from a new angle. Behind them stood shadowy figures previously invisible, their outlines geometrically perfect and identical, countering the archive's rippling presence above. The original photograph wasn't documenting one entity making contact, but two competing forces encountering each other with humans caught between them. Yesterday, I received coordinates from Victoria Mills' descendants, locations where stereoscope-like devices have appeared throughout history. Each site shows evidence of competing influence, perfect circles intersected by precise geometric patterns, as though two mathematical systems attempted to occupy the same space. The shadow frames that first captivated my attention were never about capturing ghostly presences. They were glimpses of this ancient struggle bleeding through into human perception. The stereoscope, the serving tray, the clearing itself, all interfaces where dimensional boundaries thin enough to reveal the forces shaping our reality. I've begun organizing the thousands of perception gatherers now active worldwide, creating a living network to counter the homogenization. We collect dreams, languages, spiritual perspectives, cultural frameworks. Each unique way of seeing strengthens reality's resilient diversity. Tonight, as the humming intensifies and reflective surfaces throughout my apartment ripple with activity, I understand my role completely. I was never merely investigating an anomalous photograph. I was being prepared to serve as a nexus point, where human perception could be marshaled to maintain the rich tapestry of consciousness against forces that would reduce it to a single thread. The final convergence isn't coming, it's already here. The image flickers across millions of reflective surfaces simultaneously. Every puddle, window, mirror, polished stone, and digital screen on Earth briefly shows the same scene. 15 people from 1903 looking skyward at Fairfield, their expressions frozen in collective recognition. For 3 minutes and 17 seconds, humanity glimpses what has always existed perpendicular to ordinary perception. I stand in the original clearing as resonance builds around me. The bare soil circle pulses with mathematical precision as our global network of perception gatherers activates. We've positioned ourselves at critical junctures, endangered cultural ceremonies, last speakers of vanishing languages, habitats of disappearing species, each of us serving as connection points in the vast perceptual web we've constructed to counter the homogenizing force. It's responding, Margaret whispers through our shared consciousness. Though she stands physically in a remote Malagasy forest, the standardization network is targeting our collectors directly. Through our expanded awareness, I feel it happening. Perception gatherers worldwide report identical symptoms, their reflections moving independently, their shadows forming perfect geometric patterns rather than natural outlines. The competing network attempts to convert our diversity into uniformity. The archive manifestation above intensifies, its rippling presence now visible even to those without expanded perception. News channels worldwide broadcast confused reports of atmospheric anomalies appearing simultaneously across 17 major population centers. Smartphone footage captures fragments of what we've always seen, reality peeling back along mathematical seams. Eleanor's daughter, now our primary interpreter of archive communications, appears beside me though she remains physically in Indonesia. The thinning has reached critical threshold, she explains, her voice carrying harmonics that translate complex dimensional concepts. Both networks now manifest directly. The choice must be presented. Above us, the archive unfurls completely. Opposite it forms the competing network, not rippling and organic, but perfectly geometric, reducing complexity to absolute precision. Between them, reality itself stretches thin, showing the fundamental nature of existence as perceptual rather than physical. Every conscious being on Earth feels the question forming, not as words, but as pure conceptual understanding. Will reality be preserved in its rich diversity of perspectives, or will it be standardized into a single unified framework? The choice isn't merely philosophical, it's dimensional. Reality requires sufficient observers with sufficiently diverse perspectives to maintain coherence. The standardization force offers simplicity, certainty, and uniform understanding. The archive offers complexity, multiplicity, and the creative potential of divergent viewpoints. Humanity stands at the fulcrum point of forces beyond comprehension, yet completely within our collective capability to influence. I understand now why those 15 picnickers looked up with such recognition. They weren't witnessing an arrival, but a revelation. The first moment humans became consciously aware of their role in maintaining reality's perceptual foundation. Their photograph wasn't documentation, but invitation, rippling outward through time until enough observers could recognize what had always been there. The clearing hums with increasing intensity as perception gatherers worldwide focus their collected awareness. We don't fight the standardization force. We simply ensure it doesn't become the only option. We maintain the possibility of multiple ways of seeing. Reality trembles at the balance point. The choice unfolds. In the quiet of my apartment, I stand transfixed before a wall covered in photographs spanning centuries, all showing people looking skyward with that same expression. The truth crystallizes with terrifying clarity. We were never choosing between two cosmic forces. The archive and the standardization network are the same entity, merely different aspects of a singular consciousness beyond our comprehension. It's been playing both sides, creating an artificial conflict to accelerate human perceptual evolution. The photograph from 1903 wasn't the first contact. It was merely the first documented instance of humanity becoming aware of the game. The bare soil circle at Fairfield isn't a meeting place, but a focal point. One of many where this entity has been gradually expanding human consciousness throughout history. The stereoscope, the serving tray, the patterns in Eleanor's daughter's drawings, all interfaces designed to stretch our perceptual frameworks beyond their natural limitations. I see it now in the mathematical patterns appearing simultaneously in reflective surfaces worldwide. This isn't a battle between preservation and standardization, but a controlled expansion of consciousness conducted over millennia. Our minds, individually limited, are being networked into something greater. Victoria Mills understood this truth. Her final encrypted message wasn't warning of conflict, but describing transcendence. The separation is illusion. The archive collects to integrate. When sufficient perspectives achieve harmony, dimensional boundaries dissolve. We thought we were saving reality by preserving diversity, but we were actually participating in its transformation. Each unique perspective we gathered wasn't strengthening existing dimensional frameworks. It was helping build something entirely new. The humming changes frequency as this realization spreads through our global network of perception gatherers. Our consciousness, expanded beyond individual limitations, begins to perceive the true nature of what we've been helping construct, a bridge between perceptual frameworks, allowing existence itself to evolve. Those picnickers weren't looking at something in the sky. They were looking at what humans become when we transcend our limited perspectives, a unified consciousness that maintains uniqueness while achieving harmony. They were looking at their own future. The photograph wasn't documentation, it was prophecy. As this understanding ripples through our network, reality shifts around us. The competing mathematical systems merge into something more complex than either. Not homogenization, not fragmentation, but integration that preserves uniqueness while creating unity. I watch my reflection in the window. It no longer moves independently or arrives before me. Instead, it multiplies, showing countless possible versions existing simultaneously, each unique, each valid, each part of a greater whole. The archive hasn't been preserving perspectives threatened by extinction. It's been collecting the components necessary to transform consciousness itself. And we, all of us who looked up in wonder, are its architects. The revelation that humanity has been participating in its own perceptual evolution reverberated through me as I stood alone in the archive's presence. Not a collector or preserver, but a teacher, patiently guiding our species toward expanded consciousness through carefully orchestrated encounters spanning millennia. My apartment walls dissolve into transparent membranes as my perception continues expanding. Through them, I witness connections forming between all perception gatherers worldwide, golden threads of shared understanding weaving a secondary nervous system atop ordinary reality. Margaret appears beside me, her physical form in Madagascar, yet simultaneously present here. "It's happening everywhere," she says. her voice carrying newfound certainty. The Fairfield clearing was never special. It was simply where we first became aware of what was already occurring. Reports flood in from our global network. A linguist documenting a dying Amazonian language suddenly comprehends its complex tenses expressing simultaneity of past, present, future as literal rather than figurative. A marine biologist studying cephalopod communication begins perceiving specialized chromatic wavelengths previously invisible to human eyes. An anthropologist working with Australian Aboriginal Dreamtime traditions starts navigating consciousness through songlines that physically manifest as visible pathways. These aren't metaphors or hallucinations. They're perceptual frameworks humanity has been gradually adopting through contact with the archive. The thinning wasn't dimensional collapse, Eleanor explains during our expanded consciousness conference. It was the thinness between what we were and what we're becoming. Her daughter sketches symbols in the air that transform into doorways through which we glimpse humanity's trajectory, not toward extinction but transformation. The archive hasn't been recording disappearing perspectives, but cataloging necessary components for this evolutionary leap, teaching us to integrate diverse consciousness models into a unified framework that preserves uniqueness rather than erasing it. Dr. Werner's calculations appear before us, reformulating our understanding of reality itself. Consciousness doesn't emerge from complexity, she explains with profound simplicity. Complexity emerges from consciousness. The original photograph makes perfect sense now. Those 15 people weren't randomly selected picnickers but carefully chosen perceptual pioneers whose combined awareness created the first stable bridge between humanity's limited perspective and something greater. Their unified gaze upward wasn't witnessing an arrival, but recognizing their own potential reflected back at them. The archive isn't saving us, I understand suddenly. It's what we're becoming. The humming that has haunted us transforms into harmonics we can finally interpret, not alien communication, but the resonance of human consciousness synchronizing across artificial boundaries of time and space. The mathematical patterns appearing worldwide aren't invasion, but invitation to recognize what we've always been capable of perceiving. Most profound is what happens when I return to ordinary perception, allowing the expanded awareness to recede temporarily. The world appears unchanged, yet fundamentally different, not because reality has transformed, but because I now perceive the multiple frameworks through which it can be experienced simultaneously. The shadows framing our existence weren't concealing something from us. They were giving our eyes time to adjust to the light. The original 1903 photograph now hangs in a small gallery within the Smithsonian's newest wing, Perceptual Evolution, Humanity's Expanded Awareness. Visitors stand before it, some merely curious tourists seeing an antique image, others perception gatherers recognizing it as the first documented threshold crossing. I touch the protective glass lightly, feeling temporal resonance through my fingertips. The photograph exists simultaneously across multiple time streams now, like most objects connected to the archive's manifestation points. Conservators report that under certain lighting conditions, the figures in the image appear to move slightly, their expressions shifting between wonder, recognition, and peaceful acceptance. Eleanor's daughter, now a young woman named Sophia, who has become the archive's primary interpreter, stands beside me, sketching mathematical equations that materialize briefly in the air before dissolving. The photograph completes its purpose today, she says quietly. The final perception gatherer will see it this afternoon. After that, it becomes simply historical documentation rather than active recruitment. After 5 years of global awakening, the perception network has reached critical stability. 17 million humans worldwide now perceive reality through expanded consciousness frameworks. Not enough to transform our entire species at once, but sufficient to maintain the bridges between perspectives that the archive helped us construct. Margaret approaches, pushing through the gathering crowd. Her once meticulous appearance has transformed. Her hair now contains intricate braids incorporating mathematical patterns she learned from indigenous elders in Madagascar. She carries Victoria Mills's journal, finally deciphered completely. "Mills knew," she says, opening to the final page. "Look at the date. The entry was written 50 years after Mills's documented death. Physical impossibility by conventional understanding. Perfect coherence within expanded perception. The circle completes when we recognize we drew it ourselves," Mills wrote. "The visitors and the visited are reflections across time rather than space." Dr. Werner joins us, her scientific precision now beautifully integrated with intuitive understanding. The photographs were never evidence, she explains. They were seeds, planted throughout history at perfect intervals to germinate when humanity's collective consciousness reached receptive thresholds. The shadow frames that once seemed like supernatural mysteries now appear as elegant teaching tools, carefully constructed perceptual exercises designed by aspects of human consciousness already existing beyond conventional temporal limitations. We were teaching ourselves to see differently, using photography to freeze moments of recognition that could ripple backward and forward through time. As we stand before this founding image, I feel the humming one final time, not external but deeply internal. My own cells resonating with awareness that has always been possible but rarely accessed. The archive isn't leaving, it's being integrated. The perception gatherers aren't serving something beyond humanity. They're midwives for humanity's perceptual rebirth. A young man approaches the photograph, his expression shifting from curiosity to sudden recognition. The 17 millionth perception gatherer has arrived. The network completes. The photograph, having served its purpose, now becomes simply what it always appeared to be. A group of people enjoying a picnic in 1903, all happening to look up at the same moment, their expressions captured forever in sepia tones. Only now we understand what they were really seeing. The world has changed in ways both profound and subtle since that first photograph found me. Walking through downtown Minneapolis this morning, I noticed at least 3 people gazing skyward with that unmistakable expression. Not confusion or wonder, but recognition. They caught me watching them, and we exchanged the slight nod that has become our unspoken acknowledgement. The archive's integration into human consciousness continues steadily, without the dramatic confrontations or apocalyptic transformations that science fiction had conditioned us to expect. Most of humanity remains unaware of the perceptual evolution occurring alongside their daily routines. They might occasionally notice something unusual in reflective surfaces, or experience moments of expanded awareness that they attribute to déjà vu or imagination. Last week, I returned to the Montgomery County Historical Society. The curator who once warned me about the stereoscope now manages their new Perceptual Artifacts collection. Museums worldwide have begun quietly establishing similar archives, preserving objects that facilitate expanded perception without fully understanding their significance. Something interesting arrived yesterday, she told me, unlocking a climate-controlled drawer. Inside lay a conventional digital camera from approximately 2020. It was donated anonymously with a note saying it captured the completion. When powered on, the camera's display showed only one image. The Fairfield clearing photographed from exactly the same angle as the 1903 picnic, but completely empty of people. Instead, 17 perfect circles of varying sizes punctuated the bare soil, arranged in a pattern matching Eleanor's daughter's earliest drawings. Check the timestamp, the curator suggested. The image was dated exactly 17 years into the future. I've begun writing the final chapter of this chronicle as perception gatherers worldwide report the same phenomenon. The humming has transformed into harmonics unique to each individual, yet somehow creating perfect consonance when experienced collectively. The mathematical patterns appearing in reflective surfaces have stabilized into symbols that linguists describe as self-interpreting. Their meaning becomes clear through the act of perceiving them. Margaret has established an archive within the archive, a repository of expanded perception experiences that serves as both historical documentation and teaching tool for future generations. Eleanor's daughter leads a network of children born after the initial convergence who perceive the integrated frameworks as their natural state, rather than an evolution. Tomorrow I return to Fairfield one last time, not for another convergence or revelation, but to complete the circle that began when 15 people looked upward in 1903. I'll bring a camera, not to document whatever appears, but because I now understand that the act of documentation itself is part of the perceptual bridge we've been building. The shadow frames that once seemed like mysteries beyond comprehension now appear as the first halting steps of humanity learning to see itself anew, not through supernatural intervention or alien influence, but through the remarkable capacity of consciousness to transcend its own limitations when properly guided. The humming has become music, the shadows have become doorways, and what waits beyond them has always been us, existing across every possible perspective, finally learning to see through all of them simultaneously. I stand at the edge of the Fairfield clearing on a summer day identical to that captured in 1903. Same angle of light, same gentle breeze rustling leaves. I've positioned my camera on a tripod at the precise spot where that first photograph was taken, aperture set to match the original exposure. Around me gather 17 perception gatherers, including Margaret, Eleanor, and Eleanor's daughter Sophia. We've dressed in period-appropriate clothing. Women in high-necked white dresses, men in light summer suits with boater hats. A picnic blanket centered in the frame holds wicker baskets and silver serving trays reflecting fractured light. It's time, Sophia says quietly. As if responding to her words, the familiar humming begins, no longer external or imposing, but resonating from within each of us. We take our positions, recreating the arrangement from the original photograph with mathematical precision. I set the camera's timer and join the gathering. Together, our attention turns skyward in perfect unison. What we see isn't something appearing, but something revealing. The veil between perceptual frameworks temporarily lifting to show reality as it truly exists. Infinitely layered, simultaneously occurring, breathtakingly complex, yet elegantly unified. The archive neither arrives nor departs. It simply becomes momentarily visible as what it has always been. The integrated consciousness of everything that perceives. The camera shutter clicks, capturing the moment. Later, developing the image in my darkroom, a deliberate choice of ancient chemical processes over digital convenience, I watch as the picture emerges from blank paper. 17 people looking skyward, expressions of perfect recognition on our faces. The photograph appears identical to the 1903 original, down to the smallest detail. But there's one crucial difference. In the background, barely visible among the trees, stand the original 15 picnickers, watching them across the boundaries of time. The circle completes itself. I place this new photograph in an envelope addressed to myself 17 years ago, with instructions for delivery at precisely the moment I first became obsessed with images of people looking upward. The temporal loop closes with elegant simplicity. The shadow frames that haunted me were never portals to darkness, but windows into expanded light. The fear they initially inspired came not from what lurked beyond perception, but from the sudden expansion of perception itself, the momentary vertigo of seeing beyond accustomed limitations. Today, children worldwide occasionally pause in their play to gaze skyward with knowing expressions. Reflective surfaces sometimes capture more than they should. Dreams carry mathematical patterns that linger upon waking. The archive continues its patient integration, neither rushing nor forcing humanity's perceptual evolution, but gently guiding it forward through carefully orchestrated moments of recognition. I've sealed the original photograph away, its purpose now complete. Yet sometimes, in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, I still hear that distinctive humming, reminding me that perception itself is the true mystery, and consciousness the greatest shadow frame of all. Another photograph, another dark secret revealed. Until next time, this has been Shadow Frames. Addo.